working. Yes, it is. Perfect. Welcome, Jules.
Thank you.
Welcome in the French Tech London living room. We are having a fireside chat, just the two of us.
Nice.
So, Jules, you are the CEO of Ogury.
Yeah, Chief Strategy Officer, actually, to be.
Chief Strategy Officer,
yeah.
but one of the founders.
Yes, I am.
What is Ogury? Can you tell us a little bit about the company?
Of course, I can. Augury is actually coming from, the name Augury is coming from the ancient Rome. It's a practice of interpreting the flights of the birds to generate omens, so to see the future. So that's what we try to do, actually. Augury is enabling companies and users to make informed choices. So actually, the company started in 2014 in London. So we are 3 French founders, but we were all living in London when the company started. And my co-founders had actually an insight, which was that companies are relying on bad and inaccurate data when it comes to actually engage the users on mobile. And all companies want to engage the users on mobile, but actually they are all relying on bad data. And from these insights, they actually started to work and develop data from raw signals that could allow companies to understand the full journey of the users on their mobile. Of course, everything is based on consented data, and we are going to talk about GDPR.
Not too fast.
But that's
for
what
now,
that's
you're
what
crystal gazing into mobile data. That's
yes.
what we want to know. So 2014, so you're 4 years old.
Yes.
And the journey of Ogury between 2014 and today, how big is the company? You started, like you said, 3 co-founders?
Yes. So
and where are you at today? And what was the journey between then and now?
So we've been supported by investors, so from the industry, private investors as well as VCs. So Ventec and ID Invest are at the capital of Ogury. Okay. We raised a bit more than $30 million in total from the beginning. Today, Ogury is a 300 employees company. We made, the year is not finished, but we are almost certain because we see the future that we are going to make 100 million, a bit more than $100 million in revenue this year, 50% coming from the US, actually. And what else can I say? Yeah, we've got 6 offices in the US, which is our biggest market now, and we launched the office 2 years ago in the US. So
wow.
we worked with more than 900 brands, and our technology is embedded into more than 8,000 applications and mobile websites.
So 6 offices in the US, I'm guessing an office in London.
Yes.
Where else in Europe?
We've got 60 employees here in London. We are 110 in Paris, which is our biggest office now. Okay. 2 offices in Italy, 1 in Spain, and 1 in Germany coming actually next month.
Okay, so truly a European startup.
We are, yes. So France is now, I would say, 15% of the revenue, roughly. So that's not our biggest market. We've got the most employees there because of the fact that the tech team and the product team is in France.
That was actually my next question is, you said your biggest office is in Paris, and you define yourself as a French startup. Yes. Why Paris is, I mean, other than for historical reasons, is there one reason in particular why you have chosen to hire the biggest amount of people in Paris?
Yeah, I mean, as I said, we started in London because that's where we were, and now and then we moved to Paris when it was time to really scale the tech and the product team, because actually we found that it was much easier to hire engineers and to retain them and scale a team in Paris than in London. So that's what we found, and in terms of quality of the employees, in terms of engagement, that's what we found, and that's where we managed to scale the team.
I think it's the second time tonight that we're hearing that Paris is such an amazing place for talent.
It is. I mean, we need data scientists, we need engineers that have a strong background, and we found them in Paris more than in London, to be honest.
And what do you think makes France an attractive proposition? So we heard all about how France now, the image of France is changing, has changed a lot over the past few months and years.
Yeah.
What, you know, if someone was to come and speak with you about where should I establish my startup, what do you think makes France special?
That's a good question. I think the image of France, as we saw in the previous presentations, changed a lot in the past years. I think now it's much more attractive for everyone, and including our own colleagues who are based in the US. And I think the perception of us when we open an office in the US is much better than it was a few years ago. I think in terms of talents, again, we are a very well-positioned country. I think that the perception of the companies, like American and European companies coming in France, is much better than what it was in the past. Mm-hmm. But I think that the fact that we have more and more scaling up companies coming from France makes it easier when we go to the US, to other markets, when we establish our companies. I think we have, it's much easier to hire people being a French company than maybe in the past. I think that we no longer have, I mean, all the people that we have in our offices in the US are American people, and the fact that we're a French company is no longer a problem. And the fact that for us as a data company providing insights to marketers, to publishers, the fact that we are a European company, a French company, is a kind of good label when it comes to privacy, because we saw that it can be a concern for many companies. And I think the perception of Europe with GDPR is much better now than for other countries and other companies.
Okay, so kind of a quality stamp on the company in a way.
Yeah, I say that the fact that the privacy again is something that Europe is concerned about. I think that 70% of the French people are concerned about the usage of their data by brands. So it's something very strong in France and in Europe, and that's something that all the companies in Europe have at their heart. And with GDPR, we have this image of protecting the user's data and make sure that the value exchange between the users and the brand is there, and that when the user shares their data, they do it because they understand what they do, and they do it because they've got something in return, and not just because it has been bundled in 300 pages of terms and conditions where you just have to tick a box and you don't understand what happens. And I think that's what we try as European companies to reestablish and
So I want to stay with France just for one more minute before we move on to discussing more the data and the very interesting topic that you raised, the GDPR, and how that is affecting the image of the company. But if we stay in France for a few more minutes, is there anything that you think France can do better in order to attract companies like yours, and maybe companies that have not been founded by French people?
I think that's what has been done so far with the French Tech. This kind of event that we are all attending is great. I think we can go even further by organizing more of those events where we try to speak English, and we even if I sound like I'm French, I think. The fact that we can try to melt a bit more the cultures is a good thing, and we should definitely do more. I think the perception and marketing is very important, and that's true that we have ups and downs, and we will have ups and downs in the coming weeks and months and years probably, but still I think it's much better, and that's something that we should keep doing. And then it's about facilitating the life of the startups, for sure, and facilitating the lives of the startups that want to scale up. And this comes from an environment where I think we need more big companies in France. And this comes from the exits, and we mentioned the fact that we are still missing a lot of exits for French companies. And this comes from the fact that we don't have enough big companies that are able to consolidate startups and scale-ups in Europe. And that's a shame, because the natural exit, it's good to be a startup because you're agile, but comes a time when the company grows, when they need to and probably in their life cycle, they will join a big group. And most of the time they will join a US company, sometimes a Chinese company, and especially when it comes to data, we should all be concerned, and we should all want that our data and everything that we all work on when it comes to fintech, food tech, whatever, that everything, or at least some of our companies, stay European, and that the know-how, the savoir-faire stays in France. And so I think what we need to, where we can be better as a country, is to support startups that scale up and to help them to really better work with the big companies, big European companies.
Okay.
And the telcos in our environment, there are big European and French telcos that can really endorse those topics on which we are working, and they should, I think, work more with the startups, and I think the government can still make an effort by mixing more the startup scale-ups and the big companies.
And do you think that the problem you just described, is that because Europe is basically 28 different markets that still have some fragmentation? Because you were talking about China and the US, which are those massive, gigantic markets. Do you think that the size, how Europe is organized, is playing a role in that?
For sure, definitely. I mean, concretely, like to take a very concrete example, I was in a meeting yesterday with my colleagues, and we are talking about the next countries that we want to open. And Netherlands is one of the next countries where we want to go because it's very close, but we don't speak the language, so we will have to have a team located there. We need to find people who are speaking English because that will be the common language. It's the same for Germany. We want to open offices in the Nordics, but we don't know at all those countries. So we are like, okay, maybe Oslo, Copenhagen, we don't know. Apparently, people don't speak the same language neither. So it's, you see what I mean? It's becoming very complicated. And the reason why we are doing well in Italy is because one of my co-founder is Italian, actually. So it was easier for him to establish a business there. So the language is complicated and makes things not as easy as when you've got a country with 300 million users, potential clients who speak the same language, for sure. So that's also an advantage that the British companies have over the French ones, because the big market, the big US market, is more accessible to them than for the French companies. But that's not something we can change, I think. I'm not going to ask anyone to change their native language for English to be more competitive.
I don't think that would work.
But maybe just practicing more English for everyone would be maybe good.
So now let's move on and continue to talk about, I don't know if we want a GDPR, that's always a word that I sometimes find that it scares people, but let's just talk about data and how it affects what you do. So maybe just, can you explain in like 2 sentences really basically how your company, I mean, you basically, and tell me if I got this wrong, you are focusing on mobile, so you're focusing on the data that the mobile users are leaving the traces on their mobile. You will analyze it and you will make sense of that for brands. So
yes.
It's ad tech.
Yes. So yeah, we turn data and we provide data and insights to enable the companies to make choices in their decisions, and we turn those data and insights into activations. So activation can be user engagement, so marketing campaigns, or audience revenue optimization for their audiences on mobile, so mobile applications or mobile websites, for example. That's what we do.
So obviously a lot of personal data, and we know that the European landscape, the legal landscape, recently changed. And I know you have some thoughts about that. So the first thing I want to ask you is, do you think that the landscape as it is today is fit for purpose? And how does a company like yours engage with that? What was the journey maybe for you for adoption of GDPR? Has it been a big problem? Has it been an opportunity, or a little bit of both?
As a technology and data company, we've been thinking of this like since the beginning, since 2014 actually, and everything starts with the consent. So we don't do anything if we don't have the consent of the user. And when I say consent, it's not like ticking a box randomly when you land on a page. It's really like a short explanation of what we're going to do with the data. And that's an advice to all the users. Everyone should read those 10 lines that explains what we do with the data, and we've got a yes and a no button that have the same size, that are the same color and that are in the front page. And this is clear, and this is what GDPR requires, and this is something that we do from the beginning. And that's, so for us, it was not a change, it was a change for a lot of companies, obviously. When you do that, you see that actually you've got around 40% of the users, that's our case, who said, yes, I want to share my data, because I got a value exchange for that. So the value exchange is, for example, an access for free to an app in exchange for targeted ads, for example. Or no, I don't want to share my data. As long as the user understands what they do, then I think it's fair. And all the concerns around privacy come from the fact that actually the users are not aware of what they do or what is being done with their data. And when you've got 100% of opt-in rate or consent rate to share data, it's because there is a problem. It's because they don't really understand the value exchange and because you don't really share the information. So for us, it didn't change a lot because that's something that we had at the heart of our company, in our DNA from the beginning. But clearly, there is a trend where companies really need to adopt GDPR, and we see that it's not something that is well adopted yet, even though it's live from the end of May. So it's still an ongoing process, and it will take a long time for all users to be aware of what is GDPR, how they can understand what we do with the data, and the fact that they can erase the data, they can always opt out, they can move their data from one place to another, and everything. So
we've seen that the topic about protecting personal data is just starting. Like GDPR was a little bit ahead of the curve, and Europe has been really very much like leading the way, but other countries now are all adopting, or at least thinking of adopting, similar legislations. But I think when we were talking before this about some of the challenges that you faced, you also mentioned how sometimes it is difficult to compete with people who are doing exactly the same thing as you, who might not be abiding by the same rules just because they're not located in the same country. So can you tell us a little bit about that, and how do you see the future maybe, and the kind of challenges that you went through, and how this is going to evolve in your mind? Yeah, of course. I think GDPR is a good thing for sure, and we all believe that because we all need to protect the users. But the fact is that Europe, as you said, is ahead in this regulation. And for example, when we go into the US, the fact that we are a European company, we have to, and I think it's a good thing again, but we have to display a consent notice and to ask the permission of the users to collect signals and to generate data from their journey on their mobile. Because we are a European company, because we gather data and we bring it back to Europe, that's what we have to do. US companies don't have to do that on the US users. So that's a big difference. And again, as we have 40% opt-in rate, we are missing 60% of the opportunity on the US market. So that's a problem. And when we look at what's happening on the French market, you see that the CNIL, who is regulating and who is in charge of applying the GDPR law in the French market, is going after French companies. All the companies that have been notified by the CNIL today are French companies, and if you look at what they do against what other companies do, they are not more to blame than other companies I would not name here. So that's something that we need to consider. We cannot, just because we want to protect users, we cannot limit the expansion of the French companies. So we need to be careful with that, and that's to come back to your previous questions about the advice or recommendation that I can make. I would say that we need to be careful with what we do with French companies and the signals that we send to the companies that try to do their best in front of tech giants that are dealing with a lot of data, and who are not following the same rules as the French companies. So we should support French companies more than just stopping them from doing what they can. Okay, so maybe is that a kind of a signal to the regulators to say, like, maybe help the French company get compliant instead of just taking, making examples and maybe go after the big guys. Exactly, yeah, because it creates a lot of bad reputations for our French company, and the French companies, and the ones who are benefiting from that are the big US companies, and I think we could do better. Okay, so I think we're running out of time, but just the last point is, given that Ogury is the art of reading omens, can you give us your omen for the future of your company? Where do you see yourself in 5 years?
I'd love to be on the slide that talks about the French scale-ups, French next unicorns for next time, the French unicorns. So that's we really believe that we need more French unicorns, and especially when it comes to data. So because we can't leave the data being regulated by other companies, we have to have a French champion. So that's what we want to do in a couple of the next couple of years. We want to be a French unicorn specialized in mobile journey marketing.
So the French unicorn of quality data and secure data and safe data.
Consented data.
That's a good way to end. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay.